All right, hello and welcome everybody to the Fantasy Grounds map and image creation. I'm Josh, and this is our Saturday stream where we go over all of our art-related information as well as do demonstrations of all the image creation tools that we have inside of Fantasy Grounds Unity. We also kind of bring any sort of information that pertains to that image creation system as well as upcoming art releases and so on. So thanks everyone for joining me today, and I hope everyone's having a great week. This month's actual art art package release, is going to be one that's going to focus more on some of the new animated images that we have been pushing forward. And in the beginning here, what we're really going to be focusing on is images that can enhance anything that has already been kind of pushed out there. So if you have pre-existing maps or if you have pre-existing images that you want to kind of enhance with particular elements that are going to add a little bit of that motion dimension to your stuff, will be kind of included in these next few art pack releases. So this next one's actually going to be focused more on foliage, as the last one I did some animated animals like birds and fish, as well as a lot of like water elements. In this next one, we'll be doing like these little clumps of animated leaves that you can add to any pre-existing image that you might be using, and it's going to greatly enhance the image and kind of bring that forward into some of this animation stuff without having to kind of recreate the entire thing or have a very like heavy load on a complete and full animated map. So there's going to be leaves, there's going to be flowers, grass, and a whole bunch of other things in that kind of area. So expect in the art pack release at least 4 or 5 animated images that we're going to be using to enhance all of that other stuff going forward here. And as we move forward and continue kind of develop the system and develop the art releases that are going to kind of work with that, you'll see a bigger and bigger kind of delve into those areas. So hopefully, and I will be here every Saturday and demonstrate some of that usage. So if you ever have any questions or if there's anything that you guys need further clarification on, or you just want to see like how I kind of go about it or how I want to or envision them to be used, and never think that that is the only way to kind of go about that, because there's always it's a completely open-ended system. Excuse me. So you guys can use those and kind of come up with a lot of innovative and interesting ways to kind of bring that together. What we're actually going to be working on today is we're going to be finishing up some of the stuff that we've been working on last time. I'll be streaming till about 5. So if you guys have any questions, and if there's anything else that a lot of shortcuts I use, and I sometimes work a little bit too fast. So if there's anything that I do, just let me know, and I'll be sure to kind of come back to that and try to explain that further. As well, if there's any other demonstrations that you guys are interested in seeing, please let me know. I'm happy to kind of go off and explain any of the tool sets or any of the image usage to whatever you guys need. So without too much further ado, why don't we get back into this thing that we were creating last time. And what we're actually focusing on in the image creation right now is using a secondary window to create image conglomerates, and so we can make pretty much anything that we want to. We went over this last time. We're going to continue with this throughout here. And if you guys have any suggestions as we kind of move along here, also feel free to throw that into chat. I try to keep a close eye on chat, but if I happen to miss you, don't worry, I'll come back and find it, and we'll go through on any of that stuff. So we actually went through and we created a couple of different conglomerates, and that's always going to show up in our asset folder. You can choose to where any of these images are going to be saved to. So what you actually want to do is, and you can also create your own naming conventions with searchable tags, which can be very, very important, especially as you develop a greater and greater library of all of the different kind of images that you've created for many of the different projects that you might be working on. And then even at the very end, you can export the entire conglomerate into a single image, which is always a great way to kind of work, especially if you're trying to minimize the number of layers you're using, or you can always also save it off at particular stages. And this is something else that we might want to talk about today, is that you can do several iterations of the same kind of thing and do some minor adjustments along the way and create kind of like these vast libraries very, very quickly. We can actually work on that today in a couple of different ways. And one of the things that we might want to kind of look into is oftentimes we create I bet they have, Drake. But oftentimes, what we can do is anything that we end up using often, or if there is even something that you might come up with and then you think, oh, I want to use that several times in the future, you can always jump in there and take whatever of those are and kind of save those off as individual assets that we can easily go back to later, especially large conglomerates. And we can always use these with the image fill system. So one of the things that we can always work on, and this is a kind of an interesting way to kind of go about this stuff. And let's open this creation window that we have up over here. And I'm just going to delete everything that we have in here, and I'm going to create a new painting layer. Now, let's say, for example, where we have like this stone floor over here. What we can actually do is let's move into our assets over here. And I'm just going to type in stone floor here. And if we use something as like a fill, any one of these would be a good example of this, but perhaps we'll open something up like this, or if we want to do like a tiled element as well, maybe something like this. We can do all kinds of different adjustments to it, and then we can save that off as its own individual file. And we can actually use that as a fill as long as we make sure that it is seamless. And so what seamless means is that it will match up from the left side to the right side and from the top to the bottom. And to kind of demonstrate this, let's open up our painting tab here, and we'll go into our rectangle mode. We're going to turn off our stroke because we don't want that to be active. And I'm just going to grab and drop this into my fill element. Now this is where the grid system comes in very, very handy. And so we want to turn our grid on, but I'm going to lower down the opacity a little bit more, something like this. So I can kind of see it, but it doesn't interfere with the integrity of the image much. And you'll see that these particular images, and this is we can do this a couple of different ways actually, because if we go into our stamp, we could stamp out, and this is the size of that particular tile. And what you can see here is if I match this up to the bottom, and you can see that this is seamless, right? And this is the exact size that we want to maintain, because if I were to do this in the middle somewhere, we're going to lose that seamless element to it. And what we want to do now is we can start to create this in a particular way where all of the elements are going to be seamless as well, right? So we can do different elements on the inside here. Now, what I would suggest we do is we could stamp this out into a larger kind of image here. And this is going to give us a little bit more variety. And now if we go into some of the other textured kind of images, now let's move up into here and let's go over into, let's see. Yeah, we'll go into the Winter Art Pack and go into these effects, and we'll grab some of these elements here. Now what I can do is I can grab this and switch this right over into the stamp tool over here. And I'm going to make another image layer, and I'm just going to do this in such a way that will be easily identifiable. So this might not exactly be what you want to create, but I'm going to show you here what we can actually do is we can maybe make some darker kind of patches, something like this. I'm going to lower down its opacity just so that we have some nice like little textured elements here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I don't actually go up to my edge. And one of the reasons that it might be good to put this on a separate layer, you certainly don't have to. And we can do some additional kind of color variations. And so if you guys are unfamiliar how this system works, we can just hold down R, G, or B on the keyboard and use our mouse wheel. And so if we move into here, let's maybe make a little bit more of like a red kind of area, or a reddish tinge to whatever texture that we're kind of creating here. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. And the way I do that is I hold down Control and I use my mouse wheel. And I can lower down the opacity of this and create a little bit of a textured kind of variant here. Now the reason why I made this four particular stamped images that we're kind of basing off of our original fill element is just to give us a little bit more size in here. And what I can do is I can even move in and we can kind of bring this right in here. And so what we can actually do is I can see if we see that this is a little bit outside of where we want it to be as far as like the size of the image itself, we can come in and we can actually adjust that in our layers panel, and we can bring that into line. So what I can actually do at this moment, right, is I can go back and I'll go back into my painting tab here, and I can also adjust each individual one if I want to. But I want to make sure that the image stays just here like this, and I'm pretty sure that it should. So if we go into the layers tab, you can see that this is pretty much there. And then if we go here, we want to make sure that any of this existing image, because I'm pretty sure that the way that this exports is going to be based off of the size of the image itself, not necessarily, because there's a little bit of a buffer space around some of these images. And so what you're actually going to do is you want to make sure that that's all contained within, because we're actually going to save this off, and we don't want to have any extra buffer space around the outside when we're creating a new fill element. But what we're really basically doing here is using the system that is kind of put in place here, and you can see we're going to move this down a little bit. We want to hold down Control and move it so it doesn't move an entire square. And we want to just kind of make sure that this all lines up or is within the bounds of the original image that we're kind of working with here. And we can make further adjustments and just kind of bring this in a little bit. And now what we'll do is we're going to go to our export. And you're not going to see this, but I'm going to get a little pop-up. And we can save this either as a JPEG, because there's not going to be any of that alpha space around the outside. And I'm just going to call this like test stone floor. And what I'll actually do is I'm going to do some underscores. And so this is going to work with our naming convention, and so that we can easily search all the different images that we kind of create here. And I'm going to hit save, and that's going to go into, let's move all the way up here. That's going to go into our campaign folder, because that's what I have set up to kind of go into here. And we're going to need to refresh this. And here is our test stone floor that we just created here. Now, when I come back in, let's go back into our other image over here, and we go back into here. I'm just going to create a new painting layer so that we don't interfere with what we've already created. And we'll turn off our stroke here, and we're going to make sure we're in our rectangle, and we're going to switch over to our fill element. We'll drop this right in here, and you can see we've now created a new seamless texture that has a lot of that text, that grungy kind of texture laid right into it. And as we build this out, and we can see this, we can move over into this. This is all going to be seamless, just like we did before. So you guys can spend a little bit of extra time in creating some of these elements, and then save them off for future use as well, especially if you find yourself going in and doing this often. You're going to want to save that time for later, because there's no point now in doing it several times, right? You can now just kind of create it once, and that way you can actually spend a little extra time in that creation process, because you know you can use it over and over and over again. Great. So a lot of the time, and you can actually do this as well with the textures themselves, not just with that having that floor underneath. So you could create like seamless textures that you can kind of drag out from a conglomerate of elements like that. Now you'll want to save that specifically as a PNG, because you're going to want to have all of that alpha channel kind of showing through. But that just kind of opens up a whole new layer for you guys. Yeah, I am slightly assuming that you're creative, but I'm pretty sure that you are. Now, does anybody have any questions on that before we kind of move forward with some of the other stuff? Just like we did in this particular image that we're working on, and we have all of these like cracks and things that we've placed down. We don't have to do it just with individual images themselves. We could make a new and seamless texture with a lot of these elements already kind of painted into it, and then we can constantly go back to that whenever we need. It's kind of the power of the system and how it really opens up. The more you invest in your own specialized image conglomerates, and then you'll have a greater and greater library of elements to kind of fall back on. Great. Well, if no one has any further questions, we're just going to go into and we're going to start finishing up some of these elements around here as well. And this is like how we're kind of going back and forth, right? Where anything that we come across that we want to interact with, we totally can. So in this same example here, let's say we're going to move into, I always like to do several layered elements, right? Like, so we have, and you should always think about this in terms of background, middle ground, and foreground, right? There's three major planes of existence in any image, even if we're doing something that's top down, if we're doing a scene in any sort of way. Each one of those elements, it kind of comes into importance, right? So what we want to do is like our floor is going to be our background. Our middle ground is going to be all of this stuff here. And then I also like to do foreground elements because our vision is from the top, right? As we're looking down, we are the viewer of this particular scene. And so the foreground is going to be all of those things that are going to be higher than wherever the action's going on. So what we can actually do is, let's say, for example, we want to, and we've done this a lot in the past too. Let's grab a chain brush. Let's see if we can spell it correctly. And here we have this nice chain brush, right? And if you guys are unfamiliar, I'm going to unclick the fill element here, and we can go into stroke. Except we're going to go image stroke, and here we have this nice chain, and we want to make sure that we have our one of the end caps selected. Oh yeah, we can do like a chandelier. Yeah, for sure. That'll be very cool. We can kind of build a conglomerate of different elements with it, and then we can put that into that foreground area, right? So what we can actually do, and this is one of the kind of the build up elements that we can kind of get to that, right? So oftentimes what we would do is in something like this is we would start to draw out like these chains as they're maybe hanging in that top layered leveled area here. But we're going to take it a step further. What we're actually going to do is we're going to create a fill element that we can do this and do this very quickly over this entire thing. And we're going to do that by using the ellipse tool. And we're going to make several different circles. And what we can actually do is then layer that on top of any room that we want to. And we'll have that built out instantly, right? So let me show you kind of what we're talking about here. So we're going to go into the same area here. We're going to create a new painting tab. And we're going to go into our painting tab over here, new painting layer, new painting tab. We're going to turn off our fill, and we're going to switch back over to the stroke, and we're going to set this up exactly the same way over here. Now, we're going to go into our ellipse tool. And I'm going to make this actually a bit bigger, and we're going to do a couple of different size ones here. But the main thing that we want to look at as we're creating this is the overall size of the layer itself, right, of what we're trying to create, right? So if we were to go back and look at this, and this is where the grid system becomes super important. as that translates from one area to another. Now, obviously, we can adjust the size of the image even after we've put it down. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to think about this in terms of a classic size area that we're going to be working here, right? And we have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's 13. So we're going to do something that's maybe like 15 or 20 by 20. So what we can actually do when we switch back over to this area over here is, well, let's actually, we'll create, I'm going to turn the stroke off for a moment, and we're going to go into our fill area over here. We're going to do a color fill. And we can kind of, well, we want to make sure that we are in our rectangle at the moment. And I'm just going to draw out whatever size this is, and then I can change this over here, right? So this is much too large. So we can do something that's like 20. And that's a little bit off here, but this will be fine for us to kind of jump in here. We'll just do something like this. I'm going to snap these to the grid here. And I'm going to be able to erase this as we kind of move out here. But I'm just going to use this as like a general rule here. And we'll create a new painting layer. And then I'm going to switch over to the ellipse. We can turn this off now and switch over and turn our stroke back on. That's going to remember what we have here. And then I'm going to go from this corner, and I'm going to hold down Control and Shift. No, I'm going to hold down, where's the, yeah, it's Alt and Shift. And that's going to keep it rather round and coming out from the circle. So we can do something like this, and then I can make it smaller. And we can do maybe another one. And I can come in here and I can grab this, and we might want to make this off a little bit, something like that. And I can do this. So I'm just using this as a guide. We're going to build out a couple of different elements over here, right? And we might want to do like a larger circle. And I'm going to be using these corners to kind of help guide me of where to place these. So let's do maybe something like that. And we'll do another one, maybe like here. And again, we don't want this to feel, we might even want these to cross over a little bit, something like that. That's a little bit too contrived. Let's do something like this. And then maybe we'll do something like that. Okay, so now what we can do is we can delete this, right? We have this large image, and this might not look like you think that it's going to kind of turn out to be, but you'll see how this works, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this. And I'm going to export it as a PNG because I want to maintain all of the alpha channel there, the transparencies. And I'm going to call this chain fill. And we're going to save that. Now let's move back over in here. So in this particular area, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these elements. Right, we're going to stay in this painting area. We can go into our campaign folder, and we're going to make sure we refresh our folder because it's all the new images that we're creating are not going to pop up. But now you can see we have this conglomerate of circles. I can turn off the stroke, move back over into here, and we're going to drag this and drop this right in there. Now what I can do is, again, I'm going to hold down Control, and that's going to snap to our grid system. And I'm going to just drag this out, right? And you can see we've instantly kind of created some of these elements. Now when we go into our tab here, now I'm going to make this a bit smaller, right? But I can now move this to the areas that I want. Maybe we'll make that a little bit bigger. And this is going to cut that off in these particular areas. Now I can also come into to make these a little bit darker. Oftentimes anything that we have in our foreground, especially in these kind of image elements, we're going to want to make these a bit darker so that they have a little bit more contrast. It feels as though that it's a little bit outside of the area there. I think I'm actually going to make it a little bit smaller. And you can see here we go. We'll move that in. Now let's say some of these elements, we think that this is a little bit too much, like coming out like that. Maybe we want to do this over here. All we have to do is come back over into our tab here, and we can just move this over. And so what we've done is we've taken a lot of that work that we might want to have put into the way that this kind of interacts, and we just created this like fill element. Now we can just drag and drop this instantly over the top of anything. Oh, yeah, that might be a good idea. Yeah, you could totally do that, possibly. It might be a good suggestion. Yeah, so anyone have any questions on that? Like how I kind of thought about how this was going to interact and do all of those particular things? And we can layer this on top of each other as well, right? We can do this exactly the same way. I can, especially if I want to maintain this, I should be able to just grab this, and it's going to set up all of those parameters for me, the size of the image, any sort of color adjustments that we've done. And again, I can drag out another section over here, and we can do something like this. Or we could even grab this, put this over into here, make this seem a lot more complex, and it'll cut off all of those images to exactly where we have defined the edges of that fill element. And you could even take it a step further as well, right? Like you could create some conglomerates like this, and then export that image, and then be able to have like these corner elements that you just kind of like stamp in on the corner of areas. So there's lots and lots of ways that you can kind of set this stuff up. All right, so let's do like a crazy kind of chandelier, right? I think that sounds pretty fun. And so what I'm actually going to do is we're going to go back into our other image element over here. I'm going to come in here. Let's delete this. Let's create a new painting layer. And maybe what we're going to do is we might use this chain again. So let's kind of build this out from here. And we can switch back over to our line here. So one of the things that you want to make sure that you do, and this is in the line tool, if we kind of build this out here, we want to make sure that we have our end cap selected. And there's different end caps as well. So we should probably go over these really quickly. I don't know if this image is the best one to kind of use that, but we have a couple of different ones. We have the butt one, which is it should end up exactly where you expect it to. The projecting one should expand it a little bit beyond. These might be not working exactly right this moment, apparently, but they'll actually change the way that the image interacts, and it works really well, especially with like walls and whatnot. This is probably not the correct image to kind of do that, but we'll start to build up this particular element here. I'm going to keep it rather in the same theme of the other stuff that we've been doing. And what I can do here is I'm going to snap to the grid, and then going to build this out from here. And so I'm holding down Control to snap to that middle section. And then I'm just pulling it out to something like this. And we want to do one here as well. And at any time, if we want to make any sort of adjustments to this, right, we can grab these and we can move this together. Maybe if we feel like it's a little bit crowded in one particular area. And we can also use these to kind of line up to each other as well. So this is like an image creation system that's very forgiving, right? We can build on top of all of this stuff. And that's pretty good. We don't have to be completely accurate, or it doesn't have to be something that we feel like it's got to be super precise, right? And then kind of like some of the other images that we've used, we can use some other things like I think this one works really well in many different areas. So we'll go over to our stamp. We'll grab this and we'll drop this like here, make this a little bit bigger. And I'm going to stamp this all around here. And then we can find, maybe we'll grab something like this. And we'll place this. I'm going to do a couple of different ones, but I want some similarity here. And we could do as much other kind of work on this as we wanted to. And this is one of the great advantages of working in this particular system in this way, is that there's no wasted effort. As much as you want to kind of put into each individual thing, as you can see here, we have some stuff already here that we could kind of use. If we so wished, if we wanted to maybe even expand on this a little bit more. But we're working on things from scratch, so we're kind of building this stuff as we go. Let's see here. Yeah, we could do. I think what we'll do is create another painting layer. I'm going to put this underneath here. And then maybe one like this. Yeah, that would be a lot of work, right? It's a lot easier nowadays just to flip a switch. Great, so we've created this, and again, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our export function. And I'm going to make that a PNG because we want to maintain all of the transparencies that we've created there. And here we have it. So we can go back into our other image now. And I'm going to do this on the same layer that we were doing all that other foreground stuff. And we can switch over into our stamp tool here. And here it is. And we can change it. And what I'll actually do is make this a little bit darker as well. So we get some of that good contrast from this top layer here. And maybe we'll put this somewhere like over here. Or we could even add this in with some of this kind of stuff to make it feel a little bit more, make it a little bit smaller, and do something along these lines as well. Now, one of the great things about putting all of this stuff on a single layer, and you could do this within folders as well, there's always many different ways that you can kind of approach this stuff, is that we can go into our Layers tab and we can actually lower down this opacity if it ever gets in the way of whatever it is that we're trying to see that's kind of underneath, right? And this will update in real time to your players. So what this will actually do is give you a narrative kind of choice. Oh yeah, the man bird cage things. Yeah. Yeah, you mean these things? I don't think that they're man bird cages. I just think they're called cages. But now you have the flexibility of creating all of these on your own, right? Especially with like the stroke tool, the image strokes. You could build this like super easy. Much in the same way. All right, so what other kind of elements should we put into this? You guys have any other suggestions? Yeah, yeah. See, and this is this other side of it, right? And this is what I'm talking about as far as all of this stuff kind of goes. So let's say, for example, you decide that you want to kind of turn it into that. All you have to do is come back into here. We're going to go into our Edit tab over here, and like these elements here, we can just remove these, right? And if you do this, if you do this on a separate layers, you can easily kind of come back and make any of those adjustments that you want to. Now you'd want to do some sort of solid floor or something probably that's going to be underneath here, but then you can further manipulate that image. We could come back into here and we could add some additional kind of elements on this lower area down here, probably make them a bit smaller, and you could do like more of these. And then what I'll do is go into the layers tab over here and we can actually like darken up some of this stuff that's a little bit lower. Maybe we'll just type in 100 across the way here. We could even go in and find something and make a solid kind of element there. And then you could totally create all of that stuff. Basically, you have all of the tools in here to create pretty much whatever you wish. And sometimes it'll take a little bit of forethought on how the system works. And so feel free to experiment with it. All right, so we have a question here. Is there a way to break a solid wall into two segments? Yeah, totally. Here, let me just demonstrate here really quickly how you can do this. I'll do it a couple of different ways, and you can kind of see how these work. Oh no, that's totally fine. Yeah, if you guys have any questions whatsoever, if you've ever run into a problem, or if there's anything that you'd like to know how to do, feel free anytime. Just throw it up there. So let me Let me just demonstrate this really quickly. Let's find, I'll do like a stone wall. This should, oh, I should put in brush. Yeah. Okay, so we'll do something that's got some context to it. And I'm going to do this on a new painting layer. And it's pretty good practice for you guys, especially if you're ever going to experiment to create a completely new layer to do that on. It is pretty easy to kind of manipulate stuff on their own layers, but you're just going to ensure that, I mean, you could never just delete that layer or whatever. We're going to go into our painting tab here, and I'm going to grab this guy right here, and we're going to drag and drop this right over here. And I'm going to make this a bit bigger so you guys have a little bit better of a way of dealing with this. Now there's a couple of different ways that you can interact with the system. I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm just going to snap and kind of drag this out here. And you can see that our corner type is going to be based off of this, right? So if I want rounded corners, you can see that this is kind of like curved around. Well, there's that, and then we also have a mitered corner, right? That we can do this when we have very angular corners. Now, these come into play, especially if you want to add in the overlap, because if I tried to add to this, it's not going to work. But I can add to this because everything has to be the same. Everything has to be the same. But we have this really great tool over here. Let me just delete this. Oh, I didn't expect that to happen, but right, and then we could add in some additional elements. So let's say we want to remove a particular section over here. Now we have several different ways that we can interact with this system. One, we have our eraser tool, and our eraser tool will, doesn't seem to want to do that though. Yeah, so we can just delete that. But you can usually you can just come in and erase that. And let's delete that one. So at any time you can just come into the Edit tab and remove those things. But we can also, in the Rectangle tab over here, and I'm just going to grab this. So if you ever need to reset up everything the way that it's supposed to be, right, to interact with this, this will set all of the parameters exactly the way it is. So you just have to grab this little eyedropper tool and click on this, and this is going to change those parameters, as you can see here. You see how it sets all of these? So if there's any color adjustments, if there's any sort of like the corner types or end caps or whatever it is, it'll pick all of that up, because all of that has to be exactly the same for things to get added into, right? But let's say we want to remove an area over here. We just have to go into our subtraction mode, and we could subtract out. But see, this doesn't seem to be working appropriately, but we can just go in and delete that. So if you have an instance like that, usually those other elements kind of work together to add all of that stuff. And I'll show you a little bit more of how it's supposed to work here. So let's go into our color fill element here, and we want to create a new element like this. The subtraction mode is supposed to work more like this, but currently it seems to not work on a single stroke like that. But the good news is that if we come over into here and we go into our subtraction and we do this, what we can do is we can just delete these, and it'll open up that door for us, just like that. Oh, we're still working on what we were working on last week. Yeah, you bet. Now, the easiest way too. Yeah, apparently, I'll put in a bug report to Carl though, and we'll get that sorted. But what we actually yep, that's kind of how the old system used to work, actually, now that I kind of remember it. But let's go back into that that one more time here. We'll pull this up. If we go back into this tab, turn our fill off, and we'll put that stroke back on. I found that the easiest by far, and we're going to turn on our end cap here, is kind of planning that out in the first place, because you can just, no, we don't want subtraction, we want normal. So we can kind of just build out these elements, and you don't have to be very precise when you do this, because we can come back in and move these later. So if I was building a little area here, and maybe I want this to come down like that, even if this gets really wonky, because what I can actually do is, these are individual segments now, and I can manipulate these to wherever I want them to be. So if I want to make sure that all of this stuff lines up, I can grab all of these things, snap these together. If I would decide that I want this little bit of wall to stick out further, I can build this out like this. So you can definitely go about it. But yes, if you ever have an issue in that scenario, right? So apparently we can just do something. Nope, not like that. Let's hit Control Z there. I guess we'll go into the rectangle. Yeah, there seems to be a little bit of a thing going on with that, but we'll get that sorted out. As you can see, it seems to move everything. So let's delete that. And we'll get back over into this creation area over here. I'm going to take a break in about 9 minutes. So if you guys have any other questions, just let me know, and we can kind of go into that real quick before we take a little short break. So what other elements would you like to see created inside of this this area over here? Should we just kind of go in and finish up all of the little... Oh yeah, we could totally do that. Yeah, like maybe over in here. So when we're creating these new image elements, the first thing that we would want to do, right, is start to think about what kind of material is it going to be made out of, right? Are we going to make it out of stone, wood? So is it going to be like a stone platform? Are we going to do like a wooden platform? Do we want it to be, how on the fantastical side do we want it to be? Now, let's look up table. We have like a rather heavy rounded table, something like this. We have something like this that's already kind of set up in that way. And again, we're going to start this in this particular workspace over here. So let's get rid of these two painting tabs, painting layers. But where this one's even kind of like that, but let's dive a little bit deeper into this. And we'll use this one. I'm going to go into our stamp over here. And we're going to make this a little bit bigger. I always like to make, especially if we're going to be creating like these new, let's do round. Any of these new elements that we kind of create, I would always suggest, and you certainly don't have to do it this way, but I would always suggest that making it on the larger side, because anything that you make larger, when you reduce it, it will always look better. And you can always reduce that um, when you actually apply it to where you want it to be used, right? And then what we can actually do from this area here is I think that we have like some of these like fill elements. These ones are not particularly, but we could certainly use them. But I think what we should do is we should use a fill element actually. And the reason why is we want to, because we could just grab something like this, for example, right? And we could just kind of drop that in there. But I want a little bit more control over the folds, how that interacts. And then we can add in like our shadows and whatnot, right? So we can grab something like this or even like this. And we're not going to worry too much about the color. And then we have like pattern overlays that we can also do over it. So there's a lot of different stuff that we can kind of interact with here. And so we're going to go back over into our rectangle. I'm going to add a new painting layer. We want to make sure that we maintain some control over the separation of these layers here. I'm going to turn off our stroke and let's just drag and drop something like this in here. Now the great thing about using some of these painting, especially like the fill, is that we can control the color changes. We can control a lot of the stuff after the fact. And I'm going to go into my line tool here. Make sure that we're in our normal mode. That's going to set up any sort of image that we might want to add to later or subtract from and all of that stuff. And what I'm actually going to do is, do we want to, should the bit of cloth be rectangle with it maybe a little bit of it like hanging over the edge on a couple of parts, or should we do it? So what I'm thinking is maybe we'll do it something like this, and we will have our bit of cloth to be something like that. And then what we can actually do here, and this is where the eraser kind of comes in handy, is we can start to erase out the areas that we don't want. And we don't have to be very exact with this. What we can actually do is now come in here, we can grab this, move this out to the edge here a little bit. And what I'm actually going to do, and this is a kind of a good way to work here, is that I'm going to move it on top, and then I'm going to go over into the tab here. I'm going to lower down its opacity so I can kind of see what I'm working on underneath. And then we can go back into our painting tab here, and we can start to line this stuff up pretty accurately as it kind of would be like bend over the edge. And then we can do the same thing. Let's go into our eraser tab and we can just kind of like get rid of some of this stuff. Come back into here. And we'll line this up. We want to have a little bit of inconsistency on some of these areas, right? Where it's just going to come out a little bit more. And what we can actually do is bring it in here. We can do some little elements. These will be like folds or wrinkles along the side. And the way that this stuff gets sold, right, is by how we interact with it with shadow and light. And let's come over into here and let's do this one like this. And you can do a pretty good job of of kind of interacting there. Now I'm going to come back over into here. Let's make this completely opaque again, right? No, this one completely opaque again, and move it underneath. Now, if this covers up too much of our table, we can always go back in, or we can make some of those adjustments. We can move where all of the stuff is, but I think that's going to work out pretty well. What I'm actually going to do, though, right before I take a break here, is I'm just going to go into my edit fill over here, and I'm going to make this smaller because I want that texture to be less prevalent. And what we actually do have, and I'm just going to type in fill, and that's going to bring up all the different fill elements. We have some very decorative fill elements. I believe it's in like the castle art package. Maybe it was. Let's go into that one. And so what we can actually do is use these as like these overlays to create some neat kind of patterns on that as well. Yeah. And then we'll add in our shadows for these folds, a little bit underneath, highlights, and so on. And all of that stuff layered on top of each other is going to kind of make that a little bit more believable. I think what we'll do too is we're going to make this, we'll bring this in a little bit. We want to see a little bit more of our table. And we might even want it to be a little bit more exaggerated in some of these areas. Yeah, that should work pretty well. And anything that's a little bit too angular, we don't want it to be too angular. We want it to feel a little bit more natural, but that's okay. Yeah, that should work pretty well there. Yeah, we could do it that way. Well, what we're actually going to do is we're going to come in here. We're going to do some color variations. Maybe we'll do it a little bit darker, but we'll figure all of that stuff. And then we'll add in some of that design work on top, and we'll create the whole thing. Great. So I'm going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to finish that up, and we're going to go through all of the different techniques that we're going to be using to do so, and then we're going to apply it to our image. We're going to even build like the ball itself and all of it. And we might even want to do that in two different image exports so that we can kind of combine them and use them in different areas whenever we wish. All right, guys, we'll just hang out for a minute, and I will be back shortly. All right, I'm back. Thanks everyone for waiting for me here. Well, I took a short break and refreshed my beverages. Okay, yeah, let's get into doing some of this more creation process. Now, one of the things that we can actually do now that we kind of set this stuff up is we can use a lot of the elements that we've already put down as our guideline, and we can do it a little bit more simply. And again, I'll do this on another painting layer. And the reason why I'm going to do it for another painting layer is I want to have an easy access to those fill elements without having to be compromised by them being stacked together. But you could certainly do this all on one layer. And I'm going to put down, the reason why I'm going to do the pattern first is because I want to be able to see that contrast with the element when I do all of the color adjustments and whatnot, right? So let's grab, I think what we'll do is maybe something like this, right? So we can grab this. And again, we're going to go into our, actually I'm going to use my line tool. And I'm going to drag and drop this, not like that, into the fill window here. And I'm going to do a rough breakdown around this image that we've already kind of created here. So I'm not going to do this anywhere near as exact as I did with the other ones. And I can do further adjustments as this kind of goes on here, if need be. And now what I can do is I can go into the edit fill area here, and I'm going to fade out those edges a bit, right? We can move this around, we can change the size of it, and I'm going to lower down the alpha here. And you can see what we're actually doing here is we're creating this kind of nice pattern that's not too intrusive. But it might have a drastic impact if we do the image color change first on that base cloth element. And again, I can come back in, and if I want to, I can pull this out a little bit further. We have all of the ability to readjust this stuff over and over again until we get it right. And that's pretty good. Now we can go down into this tab, and we're still switching back over into the edit fill area over here. And maybe we're going to, I think what we want to do is, something along these lines. Maybe we'll add in something like this, something that is not over the top in the power of the colors themselves, but something that's going to give us a really good separation between the table itself and then this bit of like drapery, right? And I think the other thing that we want to do is going into here. I think we'll rotate this a little bit, and so we're going to do that with Shift. So it's kind of more along these lines. I think that's going to be pretty good. Okay, so the way that this works, and the question is, it basically is that we're going to be using this as an export, and so we don't really need to worry about it, because what I'm actually going to do, I'm not going to save this image in the image system. Right, it will automatically save because of the way that the whole system is set up. But I'm using one particular image entry into the image layers, in the image list, and I'm using it over and over again. So I'm going to delete all of these. So no, I'm not going to be worried too much about it. So once we export it, what it does is it creates a completely new file of the exported image. And it creates the size of it based off of the size of the image that's present. And so no, it doesn't export it in its new iteration with any of this metadata. None of the layers, none of the stuff. It's just like a, think of it more as like a screenshot. If that makes sense to you guys. Now I'm going to go into the stamp tool over here, and I'm going to grab this little guy, and I'm going to make this dark and transparent. And I'll show you what I'm actually going to do. I'm going to go down to this layer, and all of these areas where I want it to feel as though there's like a ripple. Right, well, as long as you're going to export it, right? Exactly. So if you wanted to make a really complex single image map, but it would be better than doing 800 layers. It would be better than if you were to create any of those elements that you need and then export that as a single element that which you could use in additional creations later down the road, if that makes sense. And see what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these little upward divots kind of feel as though that they have a little bit of shape to them, a little bit of weight to them. We might even want to do a little bit just kind of poking out from here and there. And what I'll do is I'm going to turn off the aspect lock ratio, and we're going to make this rather elongated. And so we'll do this to be something like that. We might even want to make it a little bit more narrow. And so what I can actually do is I'm going to come up onto this top layer, and I'm going to do some of these. We might want to angle this. And so all of these abnormalities that I made along the edge, I'm now going to accentuate that with a little bit of shadow. And you can see here that what it does is it makes that feel as though that it's rippled a bit, right? And at any time, I can always come back in here, and let's say that one's a little bit too strong. I can move it around like this. Or if any of these elements kind of feel as though that they're too powerful, I can remove those and I can add in whatever I wish. And I'm also going to come back in. Let's go back to the stamp tool, and we're going to make this lighter, right? Back to white. And I'm going to make this a little bit more transparent. And we're going to do the same thing, but on the opposite side here. So we're going to create some nice little highlights. And you can see these variations and how easily you can kind of create this stuff. Now let's do a little bit along some of these edges here. Yeah, it doesn't take much. It's just a couple of little clicks. And I think that as you start to, develop that skill of like knowing where the shadow should be, how dark it should be, and the ability to use this system, because the way that this system is set up, it's all about being able to move those things around and change them after the fact. If we were to do this all in one layer, and this was still a little bit too dark or whatnot, we could come in and we can make some subtle adjustments, you see, on the whole layer as a whole. So all of your highlights, all of your shadows can be adjusted right here with this slide, right? We're doing it on the same layer as our pattern as well. So it's going to also adjust that, but you can see how much more subtle you can make it and stronger. So don't be afraid to use all the different tools in conjunction with each other so that you can maximize the image creation potential, right? The other thing that we could have done here is we could have actually done like a line on it, right? We could have put an actual stroke itself, and that could have added on to like separating that. We can always go back and do that as well. If we turn off the fill, and we can always turn on our stroke, and we can actually put a painted element here, right? Maybe we're going to make this, maybe we don't want it to be quite black. Maybe we want it to be something like this. And on this particular layer here, or we could even create a new layer, and we could follow this around. So you can always come back and add in this stuff if you feel like it needs it. We might even want to even go here, maybe lower that down a little bit. And all I'm doing is clicking and moving the mouse to wherever I want the next uh, line segment to move to. And I'm doing all this with a mouse. So anything that I do, I'm not using any sort of special elements at all. I'm just kind of clicking around here, and I'm zooming in and out with the mouse wheel. So if I need to see it a little bit better, or oh yeah, your community asset folder. Yeah, and you can see that that's really created some separation here. That's really added a whole. Um, it's a divide. That what I really like using lines. I'm very line oriented in how I work, and so it's a great way to use it to distinguish between one element and another. You can see how easily we kind of do that. Now we have this whole element that's kind of set up here. We've created this mostly from scratch. And we could do this really, really quickly if I wasn't spending the time to kind of talk about it and dive into some of the different elements here. I'm going to move it back into here. I'm just going to I want to add a little bit more. And let's make this round again. And I just want to add in a little bit like here. And some larger kind of variations. Great. So now that we've created that, we're going to export this. I think we'll do this and the crystal ball in two separate entities so that we can use them independent of each other. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is always recorded, so you guys can watch them at any time. So if there's anything, and if I were to suggest anything, yeah, if I would follow like exactly along, using the same assets and to get a feel for it. If you're unsure about doing your own adventures into some of these techniques, it's a little bit advanced, but if you follow along, you should be able to do a very reasonable facsimile. And if you have the art subscription, you have access to everything that we've used. Great, so let's export this. And again, we want to make sure we do it as a PNG. And so we have two options in our export. We have JPEGs and we have PNGs. And you want to make sure that if you need to have any sort of transparency in your image whatsoever, and in this one we do, because we want to make sure that all of the images are going to be square that are kind of put out. And we have a rounded image here. We want to make sure that the corners and everything is transparent where it's appropriate. So you want to make sure you do a PNG. And we'll call this table and cloth. And we'll export that. And now we can go into our campaign folder. And we want to make sure we hit our refresh button. And here it is. And so what we can actually do is we can come back into here and we have our furniture layer over here and we can grab this and we want to make sure we put this in as a stamp. And we'll make it about this size, I think. And we can stamp that right in there like that. So what we can do now is we can add in all of the different shadow elements with this if we want to. And this we'll just kind of build it up as we go. Oh yeah, each individual art pack. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that there's a lot. There's a lot. There's a lot of different art packages, and there's a lot of different elements that kind of go into it. So, yeah, buying them individually would be. I would just get the art subscription. I think it's like it's $5 a month, $50 a year. And I'm going to go down onto the floor layer here. We'll grab this guy once again, and we're just going to do some quick little adjustments here with adding this. I think we'll lower down the alpha here a little bit. And you can see we'll just add in a little bit of a shadow there. Kind of like we did with the table, just to help separate that, give that a little bit of a lift up from the floor itself. And now what we can do is let's go back over into our other system over here. We can delete all this. We've got it all created. It's right there. And so we can just remove all of this without having to worry about it. Now we're going to create our crystal ball, and we're going to do this a couple of different ways, I think. We can do it several different ways, right? We can do it. Obviously, we don't have anything that's like clear cut as to what we expect it to be. So we can experiment and do lots of different stuff, kind of like we did with this like magical portal that we created, right? We used water texture and some other elements that we kind of just put together. So we're going to do the same kind of thing here. One of the things that I would suggest when we're kind of doing this is we'll have a couple of different things that we want to have in mind. One, we might want to have like some cool kind of like transparencies with it so that you can see what's going on underneath. And the other thing is we might want to create some really strong like specular highlights to make it seem like shiny. And then we're going to have like a base, perhaps, that everything's going to sit on. And what I would do, because we wanted to have a lot of that, like those transparencies and whatnot to really like shine, we might want to do like the base is like a circle rather than like a solid, or like a ring rather than like a solid circle. So I think what we can actually do here, well, we have some glass elements as well, right? We have like this kind of stuff. We also have like ice. So something like this might work really well, lowering down its opacity and changing its color. Yeah, we might be able to use something like this as well. Let's try that. I'm going to use this in the fill element over here. Yeah, let's do this. And we'll kind of drag this out to be something like this. Again, I'm going to make sure that we do this larger than I need. And I'm going to make this much bigger here. And I'm doing this just for the texture itself. And we can lower down that opacity. Now, when you're doing it in here, right, one of the things that you want to be conscious of is that when we lower down the opacity, it's not really getting darker. It's showing this background image through it. So it's just making it more transparent. So that's going to be shining through. But that might be a good base for us, something like that. And again, one of the things that we might want to do is, I think what we'll do is let's go to color fill, and we'll go to our stroke. And I'm going to do Alt and Shift right here in the middle here. And we can kind of drag this out. I actually want to do this on a separate layer underneath. So let's bring this down here. And what I'll actually do is, let's hide this one for a second. No, we want to keep it there. I'm going to grab these, move some of this stuff so it's lined up a little bit more. And this will be our base by which we're kind of like judging everything from. Because what I'm actually going to do here, see, I'm lining this up so that we have our outline down here. And then I can come into the edit fill area here, and I can fade out this. Now what we have is we have this nice line kind of around the outside. And we have this that's kind of layered on top. It's going to give us some of that texture. Now what we can do is we can start to, let's create another tab here. And we can do a couple of, I'm going to show you guys a couple of different tricks that you can use with some of these elements here, right? So we have, I'm going to make this more opaque. We do that by holding down A and using our mouse wheel. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a little bit of a specular highlight. And now what I can do is I'm going to actually go into my rectangle. I'm just going to turn off our stroke. I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to put this in here. I think I'll actually do it with the ellipse. And we're going to just drag out something like this. And we can actually come in here, we can move this around. So if we wanted to let's make that a bit bigger. I think that we should make this, bring this out a little bit. I don't want it to go quite to the edge. We can kind of bring it this way. And then on this side, I'm actually going to move it over to something like this. And then we can grab, we want some of these kind of like strange interactions here with some of this stuff. I think we'll go, let's go back into here and let's just delete this here. We can actually delete these elements. So it's just, we'll have like a couple of different of these guys here. And we're going to want to do this with some of the darker elements as well, right? So as we begin to create our different elements here, we'll start to build up all of this different stuff. I'm actually thinking now what would be cool is if we create, maybe it's got like a tripod thing that kind of it sits on and it kind of wraps up around it a little bit. We can add some additional kind of elements like that. And again, the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, go to my edit fill, and I'm going to hold down F, and I'm going to just fade in that edge a little bit. I think something like that will work well. And remember, it's going to be something like this on our actual image itself. I think what we'll do is let's go back into here, and I'm going to do one more of these. I'm actually going to make this a new layer here. And we'll do something like this. And we can go over in here, and now we're actually going to hold down R, G, and B. We're going to darken that up a little bit. We're going to move it over. Let's increase its size here. And we're just going to grab this and move it over to something like that. It's going to work pretty well. Now let's lower down that opacity a little bit. That's a little bit much. We'll also fade out that edge a little bit. Oh yeah, that's totally true, Spencer. Yeah, we can do something like that. But you can see this is all being created right inside of FGU. So all of this is just a conglomerate of other images, and you can do a lot of this kind of stuff just with like image fill. We can come in here, and if we want to, maybe see how this interacts with it, right? Whatever layer of how transparent you want it to be. But I think that's looking pretty good. And now let's look for I think what we're going to be looking for is something that is going to work for us. I'm actually thinking let's go into our some of the industrial art packages. Yeah, something like this is what I'm thinking. Or like this, we could darken that up. Yeah, let's go with something like that. Something that has a little bit of texture to it, but we have good control over its color. So I think we'll do something that's like this. Let's switch over to our round tool here. Our ellipse. We're going to create a new painting layer. We're going to put this on the bottom. And I'm going to do it something like this size. And you can see how you can actually see some of that transparency coming through. Not sure if I like that. Let's try something different. Yeah, maybe we'll do something like one of these pipes. Yeah, that might work better. Yeah, I like that a little bit more. We'll put this more on like the edge here. You might want to just have these little elements that kind of come up around. But we'll have to yeah, the end caps don't seem to be working the way we would want them to right now. You know what I think would be better for creating that kind of stuff on the edge is I think we should do like another fill element. Hmm. Let's find something that's going to work for us. We might even be able to use something like this. Let's try it. Because what we can actually do is create like the shapes that we want. And so I want it to be like almost down to a point when it comes up through here. And let's do like one like this. Hold on. Make sure that stroke is off. We can move these around to create the shape that we wish. Basically what you want is you just want something that's going to have like some texture to it. We might have even wanted to add like a stroke to it. Let's see what happens when we turn that off. Yeah, well, yeah, something like this is going to work out pretty well, I think. And we'll do like some different kind of shapes with it. I think we'll actually get rid of this. I don't think that that really adds to it. Kind of makes it a little bit too like strange. And if we duplicate this layer, we should be able to move it and then rotate it. And I'm going to hold down Control so I can kind of just like snap it. I mean, not snap it. Let's rotate this around like this. And then we can duplicate one more. And we can go into our painting tab. We can edit these to move these around just to create some like interesting kind of textures. Yeah, something like this. So we'll go into this tab. I think that that's great. And we'll go back to our stamp tool like this. Let's change this down. And we want to add in some of these elements, give them a little bit more. That one's a little bit too much. And we'll go all the way on top here, and let's bring this back up. We'll create some like little highlights here. Yeah, it's starting to look pretty good. And now let's do some of the shadows on there. Bring this down. Do something similar, but on the other side. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now let's, we can export this. And we'll go export image. Make sure we're going to do this as a PNG. Into our campaign folder. And we want to make sure that we refresh this. And so here we have it, image that we just made. Now we can come back in here and grab this. And you can see all of those transparencies that are coming through nicely. And a neat little trick that if you ever wanted to, and we'll put this back onto the furniture layer, is that if you ever want to increase the transparency of it, you can just do another stamp. We could also change the colors. If you wanted it to be like reddish or whatever you wanted to do, you can kind of add it in there. Now what we want to do is we want to kind of pull it into the scene itself, right? So we're going to grab this and we'll create, we'll go into our shadows layer. We might even want to go down into, yeah, we want to do it on our shadows layer. That's our walls. We should name that. Yeah, very cool. Do you guys have any questions on any of that? We're kind of winding down. We got about 9 minutes left. So if there's anything that you guys would like to have a little bit of further clarification on. And what I'm actually going to do is we can go into our adjust colors here, right? So this is what we're kind of creating this glow with. Let's go into our effects layers while we do this. We'll reveal the area. And I'm just going to kind of do this. And we can go onto this one and maybe add in a little bit right there. And we get this like kind of symmetry from some of the stuff that's kind of going on. I think we'll back it off a little bit here. Yeah, any questions? So we went over a lot of different techniques and a lot of different ways that you can kind of use stuff, especially like creating your own fill layers, like we did with the chains that are hanging above. We created a whole bunch of new elements from pre-existing images. And then we also used some complex kind of shadowing techniques with fills. Yeah, I think it probably is. Yeah, you bet, Drake. No problem at all. Right? Yeah, it's kind of amazing the fidelity of the quality of the images that you can just kind of create inside of here. We should add an effects layer and put this down here. We'll add a little bit of motion in the background as well. All right, if there's no other questions. Yeah, right. I know I got a lot of stuff like that I got to make. The downside of creating animated images is that the production time is substantially longer. So, but they will be coming, all in good time. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll call it here for today. I hope everyone has a great week, and I'll be back here on Saturday. I stream from 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll dive more into this. Next week as well, I'll be showcasing this month's art package release and going through all of that stuff. So we'll be working with some exterior areas, and I'm going to be going through, and as all of this stuff kind of gets further and further down the progression line, we'll be demonstrating how to use all of the new animated stuff and bringing anything that's pre-existing into the forefront, right? So awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great week, and we'll see you all next time. Take care, everybody.